So Thompson wants to argue that there should be a right to abortion even if the fetus is a moral person. She doesn't actually believe this. She's like, I don't know. I don't think that at all stages it is, but let's grant that it is. Even if we grant that it is, I'm going to show you that it doesn't follow as neatly as you would think that abortion should be restricted. In fact, she argues that even if we assume the fetus is a person, the answer to whether abortion should be restricted is no. This is a move that a lot of philosophers will make, right? I will grant my opponent the premise they most want for the sake of argument. And then if I can show that they are still wrong, that is really, really powerful, right? Be as charitable as you can to the person who takes up the opposing position. One of the reasons to do that is if you can show that they're still wrong or their position doesn't follow, that's very powerful. And she says, well, look, I'm going to grant you that the fetus is a person, and I'm going to show you nonetheless that there should still be a right to an abortion. Now, unlike Warren, I don't think Warren's article, I just don't think it's very good. She takes a lot of words to say not much at all. I can sum up Marianne Warren's argument in like a page and a half, right? The actual article is, I think, like 30 some pages. Thomson's argument is, I think, a lot better in every way. Hers, too, is a bit meandering and a bit complicated. And one of the things that I don't assign it because even though I think it is a very good article, a very good piece of philosophical work, a lot of people have trouble with it for various reasons. And one reason that people have trouble with it is she uses a deliberately bizarre and outlandish thought experiment. Now, philosophers will often do this, and I think one reason you might do this is just because, look, if you use a bizarre thought experiment, practically everybody already has opinions about abortion. But if I give you a weird thought experiment, you come to the matter with sort of fresh eyes and you don't have these preconceived notions, right? And her thought experiment is this. Imagine that you wake up and somebody has kidnapped you and they are using you as a life support system to keep someone else alive. In her case, it's a famous violinist. Doesn't really matter, right? She'd say, look, you find yourself strapped to this other person. You, for whatever reason, they need you to filter their blood. Your kidnappers want you to keep this person alive. In her example, again, deliberately weird. They're fanatical classical music lovers. Do with that whatever you want. Imagine that whoever kidnaps you and hooks you to whatever person left you alone for a minute and you could detach yourself from this person, famous violinist or whoever, and run away. If you do, the violinist or whoever is going to die. Are you morally obligated to stay hooked up? Again, imagine that you have to stay hooked up for months. Would you have to do it? Or imagine the police bust up the whole thing and they're like, well, do you want to stay hooked up to this guy or not? It might be heroic of you to do that. It might be very nice, but no one would say that you're morally required, right? No one would say, well, once the police bust this up, that the police are going to be like, all right, sorry, we're going to sit here and they shouldn't have done this to you, but we're going to keep you under armed guard because you can't disconnect. It'll kill this guy, right? Well, look, people always throw up all these objections to Thomson. Okay, this isn't like abortion because it's a kidnapping. It's not like an abortion because you're not related to the violinist, so on and so forth. And that's one of the reasons I don't like the way Thomson phrases it, because she's getting at a much more basic point, which is this. We say that persons have a right to life, but we could mean two different things by that. You could mean persons have a right not to be killed. And everyone believes that, right? It's not an absolute right. In cases of self-defense, killing is acceptable. In other cases, some people will say it is too. Maybe physician-assisted suicide or something. Maybe, if you believe in the death penalty, execution for certain crimes. But generally speaking, in almost all cases, it is wrong to kill another person. That is a very, very strong right that it is very, very hard to trump. Well, so if the fetus is a person, you might mean that. But you might mean that persons have a right to what they need to stay alive. And her point, one of her main points is, well, look, you clearly don't believe that, or you would think that it would be acceptable if the police, once they bust everything up and arrest the fanatical music lovers, that they keep you hooked to the violinist at gunpoint, right? He needs your blood or whatever to stay alive. If he has a right to life in the sense of whatever he needs to stay alive, then they should keep you hooked up to him. No one accepts that, so he doesn't. So Thomson thinks that persons have a right to life in sense one. She doesn't think that people have any right to life in sense two. Now, I actually think that Thomson overstates her case. And I think this weird violinist case kind of obscures this. Because I actually do think people have some right to life in sense two, right? If you are starving to death and you need bread to stay alive, and I have bread, I think you have a right to my bread, right? If you're about to freeze to death and you need to break into my cabin to not freeze to death that night, I think you are morally justified in breaking into my cabin. I think, and liberals especially, liberals tend to, favor more open abortion laws. I think liberals especially are going to say that people have a right to life in sense two. The government is justified in taking some of our property if other people need it for basic medical care or to survive. Conservatives might not say that, but I think liberals will tend to say that they do. Well, but I think we can grant that and still accept that a right to life in sense two is much weaker and much easier to trump than a right to life in sense one. And I think most of us do accept, even if we think there's some right to what we need to survive, most of us do accept that our right to our own body trumps it. Think about it this way, right? You might accept, as I do, that if you need to take some of my property to save someone else's life, that might not just be acceptable, it might be a thing that the government should do. If you need to take some money out of every paycheck of mine to make sure elderly people don't starve or people don't die of health conditions that could be prevented, I think that's justified. I think if you complain about it, well, you shouldn't. On the other hand, I think my right to my own body trumps any right that other people might have to what they need to survive. And we don't need bizarro thought experiments to see that, right? Most people listening to this lecture will have 2 healthy kidneys. And most of you could save another person's life, a person who needs a healthy kidney to survive, by giving it up. would you think that the government is justified in basically kidnapping you and taking your kidney? Absolutely not, right? Why? Because your right to your own body trumps any right other people might have to what they need to survive. Or even something as, major surgery is traumatic, but even something as simple as giving blood. If you're like me and you have type O blood that they really need, I mean, mine's O positive, not O negative, it might be lousy of you if you never give blood, right? You might feel a bit guilty about it, as in fact I do. Red Cross pesters me to death. They call every day. I need to go get blood, whatever. I should give blood. It's probably bad of me that I don't do it more often. Nonetheless, it would be wrong for the government to send somebody to my house, strap me down to a gurney, and draw blood, right? Even if I had type O negative, the universal donors to O positive, that would be wrong. There are people who need my blood to survive. My right to my own body trumps that. And you can think about it, even in cases of people who are related to you, right? Because you might say, well, of course the fetus is related to the mother. Doesn't that make a difference? Well, I'm not sure it does, right? If your brother or your son or your sister or whoever needed your kidney to survive, it might say terrible things about you if you didn't donate. You might be a bad person. I don't know. We wouldn't say that the government should be able to come in and force you to do so, though, right? If your child needed a blood transfusion and you wouldn't give them blood because you just don't like needles, I'm pretty confident saying you would be a terrible person. Nonetheless, even if that makes you a terrible person, we don't think the government has the right to step in and make you do what you should and give blood, right? Well, in the same way, if the fetus needs the mother's body to survive, her right to her own body trumps that. You might think it has some right to what it needs to survive if it's a person, but unless you think the government should be taking our kidneys or our blood, you clearly don't think it has a right to what it needs to survive. That trumps our right to our own bodies. If it doesn't, then abortion should be allowed. It would be wrong for the government to restrict it. Now, I actually think this is a pretty compelling argument, but no argument in philosophy is perfect. And the open question here, and I don't know how to settle this, is abortion killing or letting die? God, it might depend on how it's done, right? I don't know. Thomson seems to assume that abortion is letting die. If abortion's letting die, then it is right to life in this sense too. Even if there is a right to life in sense too, we all admit it's trumped by a right to our own bodies. Then seems like even under a Kantian theory where the fetus is a person, abortion should be allowed. Remember, Kantianism draws a big distinction between doing and letting happen. But on the other hand, if abortion is a killing, it violates the right to life in sense one, right? And that is a much, much stronger right. Using Thomson's bizarre violinist thought experiment, if you had to shoot him in the head before you disconnected yourself for whatever reason, that's not so clear, right? You have to kill this guy, physically end his life, or stay hooked up to him for a few months. That is a much, much harder thing to argue. If abortion is killing, then it violates right to life in sense one. And if it violates right to life in sense one, and if the fetus is a person, then it is seriously immoral and should probably be restricted. I don't know the right answer here. I think Thomson is right, and I think she's right insofar as if the fetus is a person and abortion is a letting die, then whatever we might say about the morality of certain abortions, people should have a right to it, because people do not have a right to be, we should not be forced to keep another person alive if that violates our right to our own body. On the other hand, if abortion is a killing, and if the fetus is a person, then it should almost certainly be seriously restricted. I don't know. I don't know how I come down on this, to be perfectly honest. This is the key question, though. At least, I think, for a Kantian account of the morality of abortion in most cases. Okay. That is a lot with some very heavy issues. In the next couple lectures, though, we will talk about Hursthaus's virtue theory take on the issue of abortion.